So from the exterior, it looks very similar, apart from the badging and a couple of things that you'd notice on a hybrid model with the trans oil cooler through the front radiator that probably you sitting there can see, and a couple of other slight differences. But all in all, the exterior is very similar to the ZR1. Chassis also very similar to the ZR1, other than the front end. So the front end is a little bit different. It's more matched to what the E-Ray is. So every model of the C8 shares the frame. So the body is the same, whether it's the Stingray, the E-Ray, 06 all the way to the ZR1X. The difference is on the E-Ray and the ZR1X. We've got to package that drive motor in there. We've also got to package front half shafts to get the power out to the wheels. So the changes there, we had to we did modify the cradle a little bit, added a shear plate underneath to get that stiffness back. And then to get the drive shafts through the shocks, had to raise up. So they raised up about 4 inches. Same as the E-Ray, so it's basically exactly the same front end as the E-Ray. And to then manage the shock loads and the twist of that heightened shock, we've got a crossbar that runs across, just the same as the E-Ray. Other facts about the ZR1X. Interior-wise, displays. I know if you were at the talk this morning with Dusty and David, they talked a lot about the displays. On the ZR1X, the key differences are the performance app in the middle will tell you everything, right? All of our other models, the E-Ray will tell you about front drive and rear drive and what that's doing, torque and power, etc. But obviously that doesn't have the turbos of the LT7, so the ZR1X really couples all of that. So that display is extremely dynamic, showing everything from a horsepower, torque point of view on the front axle and the rear axle, as well as that added boost. And then PTM. So PTM stands for Performance Traction Management, if you're not familiar with that. That comes standard on the ZR1X. There are some differences, all driven by the electric motor and the advantages you get by having that e-all-wheel drive capability. We have what's called endurance mode. So these are all, most of these are track-based and really only used on the track, but endurance mode is the ability to use the battery at a measured rate. So being able to do, really for open lapping, doing multiple laps, more than just one, not necessarily a hot lap, but really just doing that open lapping and really maximizing the usage of the battery, but also giving back to the battery. So you're really measuring that power input and repowering the battery back up and using regen. Then we have what's called qualifying mode. That's really set up for that hot lap scenario, where you want to do one super fast hot lap, and that you're telling the car then that I just want to drain that battery in this one lap. Just give me all the energy you can give me, as much torque to that front axle as you can give me, and give me that hot lap. But I'm going to skip the next one because it's a little bit different. I'll come back to it. The last one is called PTM Pro, and what that is very similar to the highest of the PTM modes in every other vehicle, where you're effectively turning ESC or traction control completely off. And that's what PTM Pro is. It's really for a pro driver. It's not even something for me that I even use. But what that does is use the front axle to give you that all-wheel drive and that maximize the traction on the track, but still remaining you as being the driver and not having the computer tell the brakes and the axles what torque's going where. So it's really under your control then, but maximizing the traction of that front axle. The one that I skipped over is one that's probably the coolest, is actually push to pass. So push to pass is using the cruise control button on the track, which hopefully no one uses on the track, except for this reason. And it's effectively a push and hold, and what that's really doing is just maximizing front axle capability to overtake. So similar to a lot of race cars, hold that cruise control button, maximize that front axle power, and just help yourself propel past whoever's in front of you. And trust me, there'll be a lot in front of you as you're catching up to them lap after lap after lap in this car. I'm going to pass over to Dave to talk a little bit about the PAE system.
All right, thanks, Trevor. So I will go through a little bit more of what's underneath, what you don't ever usually see, and then similarities and differences from E-Ray to ZR1X. So I will keep pointing at this car, but again, this is just a ZR1 here. But obviously the first question a lot of us get is, where's the front drive unit? So you can see, like Trevor was mentioning, the body and the chassis is the same in all of our vehicles, and then we just change the cradles out depending on what's in there. So you can actually see the opening where the front drive unit would be, but like he touched on, there would be a different cradle in there and the different shocks and stuff like that. So the drive unit would go right in the middle there. It is extremely similar to what we have in E-Ray. We were, however, able to add a little bit of power to that. So E-Ray makes 160 horsepower out of the drive unit powering the front wheels. In ZR1X, we've turned that up to 186 horsepower. So that's where we get the combined 1,250 horsepower number from, is the 1064 out of LT7 in the rear, and then the 186 out of the front drive motor in the front. To do that, we had to up the actual motor speed within the drive unit. So we've raised our peak RPM range from 16,000 RPM to 17,000 RPM. That gives us the additional power, and it also allows us to extend where we use the front drive unit a little bit further. So on the E-Ray, we would disconnect the front axle at around 150 miles an hour, and in ZR1X, we're going to disconnect at 160 miles an hour. And the kind of key difference there in that 10 miles an hour is what the car is capable of doing in a quarter mile. So we didn't want to be disconnecting right at the end or very close to the end. We kind of wanted to know where it was going to be disconnecting and at what mile an hour. And so we pulled that up much higher. The battery for the PAE system is identical in an E-Ray versus a ZR1X. It still lives in the tunnel of the vehicle. It is still 1.9 kilowatt hours. What we tweaked there is how we use that battery range. So we've opened the available SOC by about 16 to 17% by allowing ourselves to drain the battery a little bit deeper down low, and then also pull it up a little bit higher in the overall SOC and what we kind of bounce between. So as Trevor talked through all of those different drive modes for what you use on track, that is one of the things that allowed us to do that and actually make some of those modes last longer as we go, and get you some better track times with the additional power out of the rear end. So the battery's still there. All of the power electronics for the battery are still in the rear. It is still 8.16 overall ratio out of the front drive unit. And then other than spinning that motor up, we had to change a few bearings and a few very small parts. But as far as the gear sets and all of that stuff go inside the front drive unit, it is still identical. So when I say that, I usually get the next question. Okay, so can I put that in my E-Ray and get the extra 186 horsepower? No, you cannot. They're two different parts. We need the hardware to do that. You can't just flash your E-Ray. So that drive unit was really made for the ZR1X, and that's what's in there with that additional power. The overall system with that 186 horsepower adds just under 300 pounds to the vehicle overall. And then it's obviously giving you that front assist. So 300 pounds or just under that for 186 horsepower is a pretty decent power to weight ratio boost out of the vehicle. And that's why the car is able to do some of the things that Trevor had mentioned with a sub 9 quarter mile and a sub 2 0 to 60 out of the ZR1X. That is it, I think, for specific internal to the PAE system. So I think we'll open it up to question and answer then. So ZR1X or ZR1X drive unit questions? Yes, the car still has launch control, and I also touch on stealth and shuttle modes. So just like E-Ray, those are still in ZR1X at the same threshold speeds. So up to 45 miles an hour in stealth mode, and then we'll do a flying start and fire up the engine as you're rolling, and up to 15 miles an hour at shuttle mode. And then just that out of a hole, launch control is the same, but obviously turned up to handle everything. And that's where we get that 0 to 60 time in under 2 seconds is using the launch control. Top speed on ZR1 and ZR1X are both 233 miles an hour, because after 160 miles an hour, we disconnect the front axle, and it's a rear-wheel drive vehicle at that point. So we have to disconnect the front axle because we start overspeeding, so that peak RPM speed I mentioned of 70,000 RPM at the drive motor, we would actually start overrunning that. So your options are either add a transmission to the front end, which is packaging as weight as all kinds of other stuff, or just disconnect and shut the system off. And at that point, your battery is usually fully depleted anyways. So.
You guys are talking about sub 9 seconds, sub 2 seconds. Do you eventually going to release initial time that preserve the 60 and
Eventually we will. We're still testing. We just know it's under those times.
With the additional battery drain of the upgraded unit, how are you dealing with cooling to get it to handle that?
So question is around the cooling using the additional SoC out of the battery. So nothing from the cooling standpoint has changed from E-Ray to ZR1X. We still monitor all of the same things, target the same temperatures. So the cooling system overall is still the same for the hybrid system. So like Trevor mentioned on the ZR1X, if you look in the left side of the vehicle front, in the front fascia, you'll see that vertical standing black oil cooler. So that actually cools the drive unit. This radiator right here, we sometimes call the Conrad, because it's actually an AC condenser with a radiator at the bottom that we will use for the battery. And then at the rear of the pack, we have an actual AC chiller. So it's an actual air-conditioned system in the rear to cool the battery. The battery on the vehicle still lives right around that 100-ish Fahrenheit nominal temperature. So even though we're charging and discharging the way the pack was designed with 525 amps of discharge rate and 400 amps of recharge rate, it's able to do that very efficiently with that small kilowatt hour and not get too hot.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But
Dumb question. What does SOC stand for?
what was that?
SOC.
SOC stands for state of charge.
Okay.
Sorry, thank you.